Welcome, Professor Ian. Thanks everyone for coming along today. As you know from your RSVP, today we're talking about postgraduate wellbeing, and we're lucky enough to have Professor Ian Hickie join us today, and we'll do a very brief intro for Professor Hickie as we move through. Before we start, we, of course, would like to acknowledge the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand. Today, I'm calling in from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and of course, pay respects to the places and parts of Australia and traditional country where you're calling in from. We pay our respects to those who have cared and continue to care for the country. Today we'll be using Slido as the primary mechanism for taking questions from participants. And the best way to join that is to take out your smartphone, scan that QR code on your screen now, and that will take you directly through to the Q&A where you can place any questions that you come up. We will try and take a bit of a flexible approach and use the chat as well, but we would appreciate if you did use the slido.com feature. If you don't have your smartphone or you're not feeling ready to use a QR code, please feel free to visit slido.com and use the code 3432590 to enter into the Q&A for this particular presentation. So today, the Postgraduate Wellbeing with Professor Ian Hickie is brought to you by Student Life, Student Wellbeing at the University of Sydney, and also the amazing team over at SUPRA. And we'll hear just really briefly about both of those areas. So we'll kick off first with student wellbeing and student life at the University of Sydney. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but the big QR code in the middle of your screen will take you to the landing page for student life, wellbeing and support at the University of Sydney. You can find a range of different support services and resources across a range of different areas, including health and wellbeing, academic support, personal support, and also opportunities to get connected, including careers and transitioning into the Sydney city as you're returning back to this to study face-to-face for those who are. We also on this landing page have information about some wellbeing partner services, including our friends over at Innerwell, Tor Campus and Sonder. So I would encourage you to look into those services and supports, and this is the most reliable resource coming out from student life and wellbeing around what's available to you. I'm going to hand over now to Gemma, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Postgrad Network and also SUPRA.
Thanks. So my name's Gemma. I'm the HDR Equity Network Officer, along with Arash Aragi, who's here as well. SUPRA is your representative association as postgraduate students, and the HDR Network is specifically for HDRs. So SUPRA offers a range of services. We run events. We have a caseworker service and a free legal service. We are independent of the university, but we do work with the university. The HDR network is both a place for a meeting place, but also a place for advocacy and representation for you. We're basically the people you come to if you want to meet people, make friends, but also if things go wrong, we're the people who can represent you, get you help with anything legal or otherwise. I'll put some links in the chat to join our network and get in touch.
Thanks so much, Gemma. And finally, we just quickly, very briefly, I'll introduce Professor Ian Hickie and then we'll hand over to here. So Professor Ian Hickie is the co-director at the Brain and Mind Centre, which is a part of the University of Sydney, and the co-director of Health and Policy. We're really lucky to have Professor Ian join us today as an expert and someone who has experience in both balancing the demands of academia and research, as well as being a medical professional. And particularly excited to have Professor Ian along with his expertise in the world of mental health reform, suicide prevention, and also wellbeing. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Ian.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Gemma. I too am on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here today on the University of Sydney's campus, and a great pleasure to be back here. and to learn a great deal from the First Nations peoples of this country in this very important year for all of us that hopefully change the direction of our country. Now, I was going to jump into a sort of formal presentation, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you some key things and then hopefully some advice, some suggestions about wellbeing, and then hopefully, since I've opened Slido successfully now, Jamie, I didn't previously, twice I've got into our own systems now in the last 10 minutes, answer questions, take questions, because sometimes more important to feedback. Just at the start, to say it's great to be setting out on a career in higher degrees and research and postgraduate research. Fabulous opportunity, great decision, great university to join. Challenging times, challenging for all of us in youth mental health, in young people's mental health. And I must say more generally, we had a society that had a lot of interesting characteristics and some really big challenges in mental health and wellbeing in the workplace, in higher education, in schools, etc., pre-COVID. Then COVID came along and messed with everyone's two fundamental pillars of mental health and wellbeing. Personal autonomy, you couldn't just do what you wanted to do when you wanted to, on any choice. You had to obey a whole lot of rules and make a whole lot of compromises. And the other important one being social connection. And of course, COVID just sent that entirely south to disconnect us all, including disconnecting our university community at this very critical time in people's lives when they're investing so much in their own ongoing skill development. Really importantly, I think the leadership of this university has recognised that the mental health and wellbeing of its staff and its students is fundamental to its social purpose. And it should be a great source of the promotion of mental health and wellbeing, which by its nature will also contribute to reducing the burden associated with mental ill health on an ongoing basis. But it is really challenging. The intellectual and conceptual and cognitive challenges of higher degree learning are considerable. It's meant to be, it's hard, but it's engaging. What we need to make sure of is that mental health and wellbeing is supported. When it's well supported, then people are more likely to succeed with their postgraduate studies and have a successful and enjoyable and productive time here, both academically and socially. When we don't do it well, then people are more likely to not succeed with their primary purpose in this particular area. So it isn't just for the hell of it. There's a very particular goal here, which is to make sure people succeed in the primary purpose in coming here. But at the same time, they actually grow their life and their skills and their capabilities. I was involved in an argument last week about hard skills versus soft skills for actually success in life. What I'm interested in is the so-called soft skills, which I would argue are the essential skills for succeeding with whatever discipline you're training in, is to have the social connection, the cognitive skills, the emotional skills for your own well-being, but success where you go in future in these worlds. So if you buy the argument that mental health and well-being of all of us, one of the things we get from Indigenous people is the better question, not are you okay, but are we okay? Is the mob okay? Is the group okay that we're part of that will lead to the best outcomes for the most of us within that group? We're all going to have hard times. We're all going to need the support of others. We're all going to need to work with others to be successful, even if you're only fairly selfish about it for your own needs, but hopefully for those people you care about that you're actually traveling with through these particular entities. One of the critiques of higher education and higher education institutions is that at one level, they're highly competitive. They're people who are highly critical. They're actually people who tend to be very focused and at times narrow on what's to be achieved in a particular way. And that part of the pursuit of disciplinary expertise or depth can sometimes be a narrowness in kind of purpose and a disconnectedness, which is really risky. That's how you get into trouble. So one of the issues is for us in this post-COVID environment that the university collectively take responsibility to join together again, to come together again. One aspect of that, of course, is the return to campus as much as possible in the new flexible environments that we have that have flexibility on the one hand, is that we actually promote social connection. We've got some data from this university through the InnerWell platform that people were collecting over the last year or so, that the biggest challenges for staff and students has been the degree of disconnection that we now face on an ongoing basis. No one chose that. It's just what's happened. But we're also in higher education been a bit laissez-faire, frankly, about the extent to which we allow that to happen, to people just to disappear in their own pursuit with the assumption that everyone can sort it out for themselves. As distinct for as humans, we do better when we form social groups, when those social groups act together for productive purposes and support us as we go. So essential to people's mental health and well-being is in the work they do every day, in this case, through the university, on campus, in their further studies. Who are they doing it with? Who are they close to? Where are the supports? Which groups do they identify with? Which groups do they fall back and share their challenging experiences with? Which are those which will support them if they have particular challenges they need to face, whether those particular challenges are psychological, social, financial, whatever? Where's the social safety net that actually supports and enriches people's lives on an ongoing basis? So at the heart of promoting mental health wellbeing is actually prioritizing it. Now, on the downside, if you look at reasons people do not progress and complete their higher degree studies, then actually mental health and substance abuse related issues from a health point of view are right at the top of the list. If you look at those who succeed, they tend to have high degrees of mental health and wellbeing and high degrees of social connection. So we've got to think about, actually, I've got to get this right. So what do I need to do? I need to monitor my mental health. I need to have a strategy, just like I do for my physical health and just like I do for my studies. How's it going to succeed? The most obvious way to do that is to monitor it. So things like the InterWell platform we've suggested are ways of monitoring key aspects of your sleep-wake cycle, your activity, your substance use, your psychological health, and your degrees of social connection. To actually have a plan about what you're going to do. Actually, which societies, which groups, which people are you choosing to pass through this experience with? Now, if you come up with the answer, there's me, and there's not a lot of others, that's a bad answer. It's actually, we need to form actual groups. In many postgraduate areas, forming study groups, forming social groups, requiring those groups to be present is in fact the most important actual attribute. Many of those people end up, being friends with. Some they'll form more intimate relationships with. Some, like the ones I went to medical school with, I'm stuck with for life. They become part of my whole world as a consequence of that kind of formal training. Now, in some areas of professional training, that's very common. In other areas of academic work, it's far less common for that to be the case. Your interest may not simply be academic. It may be in a sporting area. It may be in a creative science area. It may be through a particular cultural group. It may be in some other aspect of this university. One of the things we knew about this university before COVID and previously is we have a huge number of opportunities, but a relatively small proportion of students access those opportunities. And so a small number of them seem to access all those opportunities. They seem to be doing the lot several times over, but large cohorts aren't doing hardly any of that stuff that we have available in sport, in creative arts, in cultural societies, and in others. The university is a rich place for those of diverse experiences of young people from all sorts of backgrounds. Important. Another important issue is actually mentoring, is that actually the collegiate environment here isn't staff or students, it's all of us, staff and students, within the particular disciplines, groups, departments, faculty, schools that we are all part of. Forming connections with the teachers, with the supervisor, and not necessarily just the supervisor of your activity, but others within those areas that you're working, within the buildings, within the areas, forming those other relationships from people who've been part of this academic world, who know what its challenges are. One of the really good things I think about the great majority of senior staff that I work with is their willingness to support younger people to succeed. Now, it may not always seem like that. It may seem the relationship's a bit different at times, but in truth, most people who are here love to teach. They love to supervise. They love to support. They take great pleasure out of seeing people succeed in the longer term, even if they're being somewhat critical in the short term about how to get there, even if they're involved in the skill development. So developing those kind of relationships with people who are further advanced in the courses you're in, or also are working in that area at sort of junior faculty level or at senior faculty level, looking for those opportunities to work with people, to be connected with the institution, not simply just with other students with the institution, but its wider social discipline. Really important. The other issue here is often people become totally preoccupied with just the degree that they have to complete. I'm not really big on sort of work-life balance and the idea that, you have to have a certain number of fixed hours of doing this and fixed hours of doing that and whatever. But it is true that people who overly narrow their preoccupation to a totally academic thing, so they don't sleep, so they're not physically active, so they don't socialize because they're just trying to focus on the academic bit, generally do poorly on the academic bit. The harder they try, the worse they do at it. So actually pursuing other interests that are alongside but complementary, that help to maintain a normal physiology. Alongside the social connection data we have, was very worryingly the very poor sleep-wake cycles of many of our students and staff. They are people that love to play with technology till 3 a.m. They are people that are on screens a lot of the time. They are people that are information seeking and information trading. You sometimes wonder what else they're doing at times. That, we actually need to maintain a kind of physiology of health along with the mental health and well-being of that. And that includes sleep-wake cycles. It includes actually continuing the everyday productive lives along with the kind of mental life that we're seeking to promote through these particular areas. Then actually having a good idea about yourself. I'm very fortunate at the moment. In fact, I was doing this morning a recording podcast with my great friend, James O'Loughlin, about minding your mind. And he's just totally intrigued as to what anyone can actually do. And what we discuss a lot of the times, actually, there's a podcast of that name along with the book, is, do I know much about myself? And usually you get to be about my age and his age before you start thinking about, what do I know that works for me? For me, if I don't sleep, I'm in really bad shape. I don't really like exercise, but I need to do it. Do I do particular things? What things actually work? What things do I get the most pleasure from? What sort of things do I enjoy? To what extent are they built into what I do? To what extent do I know how I cope with stress in a productive way or a non-productive way? To what extent do I need to do some things on my own, but I need to do other things in groups? Having a much better idea about yourself. And at this stage of your life, needing to know what are the things that you engage in that assist you to cope with the difficult periods. And at times, what are the things that you do that don't help? One of the things, well, there are two things common in our world. One's alcohol and substance misuse. Not a great help for a lot of situations. But the other one, more commonly in many ways, is to retreat, is to try and solve on your own particular problems. So often when people are in trouble in our worlds, they retreat, as distinct from connected and help out. The richer the social group that you're in, the more likely other people are, of course, to reach out to you if you're struggling, or they recognize that you're not actually interacting the way you normally were, and they would reach out to you in the same situation. So being part of those groups that understand these are challenging times, but we can help each other through the particular challenges we face, while hopefully enjoying a great deal each other's sets of actual attributes and contributions on an ongoing basis. So my big message is, be aware of your mental health and well-being. Have some idea what works for you. Then connect. Connect with students, connect with staff, connect with like-minded people, to know that you are part of functional social groups, and spend time fostering those groups. See it as insurance policy, the sort of stuff you need to spend time with so that when you need it, it's actually there. What a lot of people find out is they need it, but it isn't there because they spent no time at it while they were locked up on libraries, in screens, doing whatever they were doing on their own, trying to advance their particular thing, and didn't actually benefit from those particular issues. And then monitor it, use the tools, use the other services, and be aware that the university does provide sets of association services, online, in person, etc., where that's actually needed. I do think at this point, this university has actually started to really get its act together on these issues. From the Vice-Chancellor down, saying it's important, then enacting that through its faculties and schools. And I must say, particularly heads of schools, I've found to be particularly likely to take this issue on for staff and students, and to provide that network between students and across students in that particular way. As much as possible, join into those disciplines, join into those social groups to promote your own mental health and well-being. So I'll stop at that point, Jamie, to take questions.
Great, I can read. There's some questions out. We do have some questions.
I'll go right ahead, Jimmy. Yeah.
No worries. Just 1 second. My phone has decided to refresh. Okay, cool. So firstly, how can students balance academic, personal and professional workloads whilst maintaining their well-being?
Well, in one sense, that's the answer. It's the balance, by devoting time to the things. I've often hear students, and particularly high degree students, I've stopped playing the sport I was playing. I've stopped going out. I'm no longer contact because 20 hours a day I'm doing the particular academic thing that I'm doing. So they've abandoned the activities associated with balance in order to focus on one area, and their well-being has declined significantly as a consequence of the particular issue. So I think one of the things is actually, and it helps to have those things scheduled in. The one great thing about having a basketball game you're going to play, a tennis game you're going to play, a concert event you're part of, a musical society that you're a member of, is actually the events are scheduled. So you don't wake up and go, oh, I can't do it today because I've got too many assignments to finish. I've got too much to do. I've got to go to the lab, I've got to do whatever else. And if it's not there and it's just me, I won't do it. So it doesn't get done again. Oh, I'll go to the gym next week when I've got time. No, I won't. If I'm paying the personal trainer, or it's a group of us is going, or I'm running on the field with my AFL team, or I'm, in the pool with a water polo team, I'll do it as part of a group, but I won't do it. So I think what you find is people have got scheduled activities, people are part of groups with a kind of social responsibility, also social support to do it. They do it. The others quickly lose it. So scheduled and committed.
Yes, I agree with that. Putting boundaries around academia in that way too, right?
Brains don't work 24 hours a day. Humans are not computers. You can't turn them on. They're not automated. They collapse. Cognitive function runs in short periods that works. And after that, it largely doesn't work. You're just looking at the screen.
Yes. Okay, the next one is about relationships. Managing relationships is inherent to postgraduate and HDR students, or studies rather. Any experiences or strategies you can share?
Yeah, being in them, being in relationships. So this is it's a really serious issue as people trying to run their lives at times, trying to get that right. So there's a hierarchy of relationships. If you're fortunate to have a very intimate, personal, one-on-one type relationship, that really matters to people's mental health and well-being. So, clearly, if you're in such a relationship, prioritizing that and not abandoning that, just assuming your intimate partner will put up with whatever you do, bad idea, actually in particular ways. And you see there's a lot of professional studies and others. He, she, they will still be around when I'm finished. Well, they may not be. Then within the next sort of, if you like, level of relationships, close friends, particularly close friends and colleagues, other fellow students in this sort of setting really do matter. So, we often ask the people, like, got an intimate partner? Yes, no. Got 4 or 5, 3 or 4 other people you're really close to, you can rely on, you meet with regularly. Not I knew them at school, but I haven't talked to them since in the last 5 to 10, but people you regularly interact with and dialogue with, spend time with, maybe go to a drink with, maybe go to a sporting event with, maybe go to a concert with, talk in particular ways that you really are in contact with, and you're sharing the ups and downs of each other's lives. So, we often think of a hierarchy of sort of social relationships. You've got an intimate one, prioritize it. If you've got 4 or 5 others, 3 or 4 that sit below that, they may be family, but they may be particularly other friends, treasure them, attend to them. So, as I have a sister who says, it's time you tended the social fences. It's time you got out and spent time making sure those things work. So this is a time allocation issue and a prioritization issue around those reciprocal relationships that really are fundamental to our mental health and well-being. And they're really important to have them when you're really busy or stressed by what you're trying to do, like this high degree.
Absolutely. Okay, so newbie PhD student, any thoughts for establishing strong relationships with your supervisors?
Yeah, I like the word plural there. Okay, sometimes there's the one-on-one bit of the supervisor. Okay, as much as possible, connecting with people, more senior people at various levels of development. There may be people at the end of their degree, end of their PhD, submitting their thesis. There may be early postdoctoral, other people, but people in the other areas. They may not be the most senior supervisor in the particular group you're in, but developing other connections with people who are along that pathway, who've been along that pathway. Yes, now this is easy for the extroverted, outgoing, chatty, socializing types. That's kind of easy. A lot of other people in our particular work are serious, more introverted, quieter type people. Ask, join in. If you have within your school, your discipline or your department, early career research type of things, postgraduate study type groups, other meetings that involve, particularly meetings with students who are just slightly more advanced, early careers, postdoctorals, meet them, greet them, go to the meetings they have, go to the academic meetings that they have, go to the small group meetings that they have, try and engage yourself with them. They're really helpful. And then increasingly you might find further afield, older or more mature in time, I don't mean mature in actual behavior, but more mature, kind of further along the academic kind of career development, who are also very helpful and often very wise about the kind of where the best opportunities actually are along the way. And where there might be opportunities for actually practicing in the discipline you're talking about, working in it, having work experiences in those areas, or other sets of experiences that sit around what you're doing that give you a better idea about whether it's worth doing, what the long-term gain might be from actually doing this. We see this a lot in things like health and law and finance and other areas. When people kind of see what the point of the thing is they're doing and have some work experience in that area, they're more likely to then actually enjoy or continue with the particular specific detailed, thesis work that they're doing.
We have a question in the chat that's actually straight related to that. And I'm also the Disability Equity Officer, so this is related.
Oh, yeah.
It's about for those who are afflicted by social anxiety or avoidant personality disorders, and I would say anyone on the neurodiversity spectrum. Some of the advice you're giving is, as you said, it's easier for people who are extroverted or more have some social acumen. Would you give any advice for people who are a little less comfortable with kind of putting themselves out there?
Yeah, so here's people might not believe this, but I discuss with James a lot on our podcast all the time. Both of us by temperament are somewhat introverted and shy by temperament, for those who know us well. But we spend our lives trying to do more of the opposite in order to not miss out on opportunity, to try and engage with particular issues. Now, for many younger people, also the COVID years have exacerbated this. So social anxiety and shyness and introversion always were with us, but due to the periods that people have spent disconnected, these are more challenging for many more people now than they ever were. So there's two sides to this. We as an institution, through all the social factors we have, we need to reach out more and make it easier for everybody to re-engage. Some of it's a bit top down. You all come back to campus. That's a good start. If we're all in the same room, same place, coming back to tutorial groups, coming back to actually meeting in person, not just meeting online, very important aspects of that. For those who have really more significant issues in this area, more significant either disability as a consequence or really challenging, then learning specific skills, seeking professional support, finding ways to actually do what's called exposure. Gradually let yourself be actually subject to more and more of those environments without being overwhelmed by them is really important. But having a plan and a strategy about how to do that, so you're doing it in measured ways so you can gradually increase how much you can do. But to have the distinct plan, and I think the awareness, this is really challenging in various ways. So also, this is where technology has actually been quite useful. For a number of people, it means actually starting with meeting online. It means doing other ways in written ways. It doesn't necessarily mean jumping out immediately into some really big social situation, which is totally overwhelming. It means finding a pathway to socialization and connection that you can cope with, but it's one of gradual increase in the amount and complexity of that exposure over time. So to be really aware of it, but don't just go, oh, that's just how I am. There's nothing that can be done. Most of us can learn to some degree, facilitated either by various tools or facilitated by other professionals to do it. I think on the university side, we're doing all we can to provide more opportunities in different kinds of groups, in different kinds of ways to support that. We recognize that it is a major problem. It always was a major problem, but it's one that's been exacerbated by the COVID years.
Yes, absolutely. And I've put a link to the Disability Network as well. You can join us. We're available as a support and just a social network as well.
I think the other thing to say there, Gemma, is, people share experiences online. Yeah. People talk about this. You're learning from others. Look, I was like that, or am like that. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I can cope with. Try this. Join in. Don't feel bad about it. In fact, in the academic industries, generally speaking, we are more introverted. We are more shy. We're more in our own head type people. We are not the raging extroverts who run out, Instagramming and celebrity dancing and, doing other stuff. We're generally speaking quieter, more reflective people, which has a marvelous upside in terms of thought and work, has a bit of a downside in terms of socialization in large groups.
Yes. Okay, our next question is about being a parent, and I can see that it's both on Slido and in the comments here. What would you suggest to recent parents that are unable to schedule ahead of time their agenda to find balance as every day is unpredictable? What would you recommend to stay balanced while coping with uni?
Yes, I've had a few children in my life. quite a large number, actually. So I faced this challenge myself repeatedly throughout my academic career. So there are two aspects to this. It's a bit of personal kind of thing here, is I and those I was close to, mums of those children, etc., were only ever able to do that by having a wide social network. Parents, grandparents, extended care, lots of other things. So one of the things I think with parenting is the kind of, at the moment, a social kind of idea that puts a huge amount of emphasis on you must be the perfect parent along with everything else while being a student, while working, while supporting. So my first piece of advice is recruit as many others as you possibly can to the task, as many other backups in the wider world. It's where wider social connection, wider family groups matters, and that might include other parents who are students, other sets of groups who understand, so that part of that unpredictability can be balanced by having a lot of safety net mechanisms in place. In fact, it's very difficult, I'd suggest, to be a parent and work in any environment without actually having multiple layers of sharing that on board. And then as much as possible to actually, I think one of the things about about the blended learning, other issues we have now, we probably have more flexibility on the learning side than we had in the past to some degrees, which is, I wish that had been the case when I was younger, that where there's more flexibility, you didn't necessarily have to be in the place all the time to actually access the learning. It is an issue, I think, though, when parents are really struggling, also taking up with supervisors and with other groups. So very commonly in the group that I lead, the vast majority are women of childbearing ages, and they're also parents of young people. Our groups, to function, have had to become much more flexible around childcare arrangements and the crises in childcare arrangements and the things that go wrong every day in those arrangements. So I think that's also really worth exploring within the group that you're joining. Just how flexible do they understand? To what extent can the group you're part of take account of the need to be a successful parent along with being a successful student?
Great, thank you. Okay, and another mature age question. I'm a mature age part-time student and I'm on campus once a week. There hasn't been an orientation for my program. How can I connect with others in the program?
Right, so raising the first kind of issue about I'm not sure, with a school or department, wherever you are, what is the orientation? I think this is one of the issues within each of the entities within the university we're trying to address more directly. How do students know what is available, where people meet, what are the connections? And I take the point that if you're mature age, you're only here once a week, that can be hard. But I would suggest taking that up directly within the school or the department or the entity that you're in. What is actually there? And finding out from people who know, what is actually there, and what other opportunities they may have. And to what extent some of those are actually online opportunities as distinct from face-to-face opportunities, or at what particular times do they occur? I think it is really challenging for students who are working their mother responsibilities to find time. But I'd say even more so for many of those students, there's a great need to connect with the student experience, and not say, oh, we're just too busy to do any of the other things. I'm only coming here to get the degree or get the whatever and then get out. You're probably going to miss some of the most important learning experiences and things that are really to be gained through the whole degree experience by not participating in some of those other activities. So to the extent that you can balance that with other responsibilities, financial, social, personal, familial, I'd suggest trying to at least be part of the student experience is extremely worthwhile.
I agree. What can you do to help prepare yourself for the periods where you might have intense experiments and need to be running at full capacity? How do you not burn out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been discussing this right here. When the series that I've been doing about Minding a Mind and other things, and in recent years, you might think anxiety, depression, things I normally talk about have been the biggest topic. Actually, they haven't. Burnout's been the biggest topic. Most people felt through the COVID period, they were just required to be doing stuff all the time. I was discussing with a bunch of people involved with high performance athletes and high performance teams in other industries, this idea that people can just be on 24/7, 365 days a year, as distinct from plan. So many industries know, sporting industries, they know when the grand final is. You know, things like the financial industries, they know when the auditing season is, or the tax area. They know there are certain times of year where much higher performance is required. So they plan for that and go, okay, during that particular period, I'm going to have to do more. I'm going to have to be more focused. I'm going to have to focus on the particular things because there are deadlines to be completed. But I'm not going to do that for the rest of the year. I'm going to have other periods where I do take holidays. I do take time out. I do have a lower expectation in the work cycle or the study cycle for that. I cannot perform. Humans do not perform like machines in any area, whether it's, you know, sport or it's the creative industries or it's the things like the academic industries we're in. There are periods where it's better to think about periods where you're doing other stuff, connecting with your life in more general times, and periods where you're going to need to focus on those particular areas, but not to pretend that you can do that 365 days of the year. You can't. So the extent to which you take holidays at other times, you take time out at other times, you reduce the amount of academic time, you spend time with families or people you love and care for, or you often do other things at other times, recognizing when you get to these particular intensive periods, I'm going to have to spend particular times. And then negotiate that, of course, with those around you that matter.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And this is related. How do I manage my, oops, I just disappeared. How do I manage my well-being while completing my studies over an extended amount of time? Because I think that's a good question because HDR is trying to do one project over an extended period of time.
Well, this is where self-monitoring comes into play, where, you know, Jamie mentioned earlier, the InnerWell app, or other people are often using other apps. I just shower. My favorite personal kind of thing is to play around with my own activity data. Now, I have a certain kind of average, but I'm going to show you the variation in that average. You know, it has a lot of ups and downs in a particular way. But I've actually got, I don't know if you ever have these things. This thing tells me not just what I've done this week. You know, I can see the last 6 months if I want to, or I'm sure as many of you know, you can see the average over the last year in terms of various months of the things, is to know and monitor over various times. Now, you can do that for your mood. You can do that for your well-being. You can do that for your sleep. You know, there are variations in that. Now, and so the monitoring of that, now, most of the things I showed you about myself, that you can see there's ups and downs. Right? There's times when I'm less good, you know, like, but it's okay because the general average or the general trend is to maintaining various bits of that. There isn't a general trend downwards. If there was a general trend downwards, if I was becoming less and less active every month, if I was having more trouble with my sleep every single month or week, or my mood was generally going down, my energy sense of being able to do things was going down, take action. So actually, the self-monitoring aspect of this over longer periods, as we have more of these kind of apps, personal devices, is actually really useful because people often don't recognize patterns in that. There are times of year or places and particular periods where it's making a difference. And they often don't recognize that they've started to sort of slide. You know, it's interesting, the burnout, previous discussion, etc. So self-monitoring for some of these simple things over long periods of time is actually really useful. I mean, many of us do this, of course, I try not to, but many people do it for their body weight or for their pulse rate or for their physical activity, for their physical health, because they know they're trying to maintain something over a longer period, not just this week. I don't want to be fit this week. I'd like to be this, you know, reasonable body weight for the next 5 years. So they're actually monitoring it so that they can take actions continuously and detect if it's actually worsening. Hopefully you'll detect what makes a difference, what actually makes you, you know, for those who are interested in my wild activity cycle, it's got to do with time I spend with some key others who make me more active. When left on my own, I don't tend to be so active, you know, but actually I know as a consequence of that, if I want to maintain my activity levels, I'm a sort of person that is active in the company of others, but left on my own, I tend to be rather inactive, you know. So I know that about myself and I can build that in to maintain a reasonable average.
This next question is specific, but I think it relates to general issues. So I have suspended my PhD for research period 1 due to chronic illness. And I'm wondering if I should do that for period 2. What factors should I consider?
So chronic illness is really challenging. It depends on the nature of the chronic illness and the interference with things. I am tied up with a whole body of work around chronic illness, particularly obviously chronic mental health problems, with being at work, being engaged, participating actually helps to get a better outcome from the illness. So in my world, we have this saying, we don't get well to go to work, we go to work to get well. Now, I'd say the same about education and skills, or it's about engagement, is that as much as possible, there is a lot to be said for engaging with. Even if it's a consequence of your illness, you can only engage part-time or you're limited in a particular way. That actually, across a whole range of conditions, if you can, now I'd say that obviously individual situations are different here, but if you can maintain some degree of engagement with this kind of purposeful activity in education or employment or else, then generally speaking, your well-being is much better off. And interestingly, the outcome of a bunch of illnesses are better when people are engaged than actually when they quit. So if it is at all possible to to continue your studies, I'd suggest finding a way to continue your studies. But this is where discussion also with the school or the entity or with the university about how best to do that. I want to stay engaged, but I'm going to need a fair amount of flexibility to achieve that because of my other health condition, and engaging others to assist with that. So often we find students have no idea about that, but then when they engage with the university through disability support or through other areas, they find out the university is actually much more flexible than they thought and can make adjustments for their health needs. We actually want you to succeed. We actually want you to progress. And we want that to include people who do have the experience of living with chronic illness.
Yes, I think the person clarified in the comments, physical chronic illness, pain and fatigue. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I'm personally involved in a lot of studies in that particular area. And the challenge of that, the same thing, is that if possible, maintaining contact despite the pain and the fatigue, maintaining and finding ways to continue to participate generally has, certainly from a well-being point of view, generally better off. And often in terms of management of those particular periods, particular problems, the person's better off.
Okay, we have a question that basically says, to be honest, between the demands of postgraduate study, personal life and work, there is little time, if any, to have a social life whatsoever. I don't know if that's a question. That's just a statement.
Well, I think it's the experience. That's a very important comment, because I think in the experiential kind of sense, you know, I've got no time to live my life. I'm so busy living my life, I've got no time to live my life. Now, I'm from the, I'll tell you this, you know, very important context or symptom, if you like, of mental ill health, particularly with depression, is the notion of anhedonia, which is sort of the lack of hedonism, the lack of pleasure. If there's no pleasure in everyday life, life is extremely challenging. Now, it may be that pleasure is actually through work, it is through study, it is through whatever else. You know, when people often say to me about work-life balance, I go, no, I love going to work. Now, work is not, you know, I don't live my life outside of work. I live a lot of my life in work. I live a lot of my life in study. It's extremely pleasurable. It's not the other bit tacked on after 23 other hours in the day, I'll have the half an hour of pleasure or something, you know, it's actually what I'm doing, the productive activity. So I think we have to be careful at times that we don't dish that stuff from which we derive a great deal of pleasure and fulfillment, which is actually productive work and engagement with education, etc. But there is clearly also a priority kind of question. If you clearly knock out all other pleasurable activities, all other social activities, all other physical activities in time of just really narrowly pursuing the academic thing, it's a problem.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, this is a juicy question. Are there any research strategies or thought behaviors that can help address imposter syndrome in the honours HDR research experience?
It's a fascinating idea. Yeah, when you get old enough to realise it's okay. It's the Donald Rumsfeld thing, okay? We don't even know what we don't know. I mean, I had a fascinating experience last week with a guy, close friend. He was this close to winning the Nobel Prize, but for various political reasons, was given to others in circadian body systems. And I reckon I know a whole lot about those particular things. And this guy I really love comes along, gives this lecture here. I thought, I hardly know anything. I really, you know, he just knows a whole level of other things I've never even dreamt of. So this is a kind of like throughout our academic lives. So I say at my own very senior level, I still have days like that, you know, that actually the pursuit of knowledge is like that. Don't worry, you belong, right? But in a realistic way, I think there's a kind of and often at a more junior level, the pretense that we have to be knowledgeable, we have to be smart, we have to clearly justify being here. If you're here, you have every reason to be here. And, you know, the job for us is the pursuit of genuine knowledge is difficult. It isn't all known. You know, everyone doesn't already know what there is to know. And there's going to be a lot of bumpy sort of periods. So it's a very common experience in the particular way. Now, I think this is where being valued by the people you're working with. So I just meeting just before arriving, a really talented young woman working in our particular kind of program, right? Clearly, she has the skills to work with us for a long period. She doesn't yet have the knowledge of having worked here for 30 years. That's a different thing. The skill sets and the intelligence that you bring, that's what we're looking for. And hopefully you have people in terms of mentors, in terms of supervisors, in terms of other people who feed back to you that you've got the skills. So it's not only what you can do, you know, but also what others can do. And in a sense, if you're really preoccupied with that kind of stuff, then the sort of cognitive strategy is to test that. You know, to what extent is it really true? To what extent in terms of your academic performance, things you've achieved already, is it really true that you don't belong here? Now, most people would find it's an anxiety, it's an understandable concern, but the track record is you do really belong here. But the challenge is also large. We are in the pursuit of new knowledge. We're in the challenge of challenging existing ideas, but we're all in that collectively. So discussion also with your peers and with others, again, who share the same anxieties, is fine.
Okay, I have a typical question here. The way it's worded is, I really do believe that most people want to help us, but why does it still feel like some couldn't really care less about things like well-being, that they just seem to want to, the wording here is cull some of the weak. The way that I've experienced this is that, you know, academia is sort of like, if you're finding it difficult, then this isn't for you, you know, you should be working 24 hours a day or you should not be here. I've heard that kind of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When I was young, you know how hard it was. When I was young, you know, that sort of stuff. So look, it's an interesting thing about the culture of academia. And I'm involved in a lot of discussions in this university, I think in a really productive way, that there are some cultural aspects of academia traditionally, which mitigate against what I've been talking about. One of them is the competitiveness of it. You know, this sense of being culled at all levels, and that only the brightest or the most attractive or whatever they are will somehow get there in the end. There's a strong sense of competitiveness, a strong sense of self-reliance, strong sense of individual responsibility. Certainly, going way back, when I went to university, it was kind of, oh, they got to university, so they can pretty much take care of themselves from here on. If they can't, they don't deserve to be here. So I think we have seen a huge shift in that over my 4 decades now in the higher education sector in one way or another. So there has been, I think, a history and a culture which at times was overly competitive, not very supportive, didn't really value kind of relationships in various ways. If, however, you're contrary, and I've been very fortunate in my own professional life and academic life to have had the support of seniors and others and groups to get through the tough times, to make me feel that I probably do belong in these kind of things, you know, to incorporate me as part of that much longer, rich traditions of universities and of learning and of challenging the culture around us, you know, in various important ways. We're a really important cultural institution. We're a very important central part of our society, and to sort of understand that and value that. So I think we have some legacy issues, and you will, from time to time, run into individuals who seem to belong to the old school, if you like, you know, to in some way perpetuate that. I would hope these days they're the exception, and that the great majority of people I'm dealing with in senior positions and others are really engaged with the challenges that young people face today, often the multiple challenges they face on the financial and social front to be here at university, managing their lives as well as trying to manage their ongoing education, And I think certainly all the signs within the university, our own university, and then more broadly, are of a change in culture towards a more supportive environment. So I think, this is true of many other workplaces, I might say as well, a really shift in attitude to creating the best environment we can create for all of us to have the chance to succeed, in those environments. So if you have the unfortunate experience of running into some individuals who aren't much like that, I'm sure down the corridor, around the corner, or over in the local cafe or somewhere close by, you probably find others who are more supportive. If you run into this directly in supervisor type relationships, then I think you need to take it up within the school, department, entity with which you're working. If you're running into very negative attitudes that are not consistent with what we are saying more broadly as an institution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I have a question in the chat about international students. Says, I have seen that the majority of international students prefer to meet and hang out with students from the same region they belong, especially students from Asian countries like China, India, and Pakistan. How should they avoid this, or should they avoid this, and be part of the broader student community? Any special advice, Ian?
Yeah, so both things are true. Okay, I don't think anyone should feel bad about hanging out with people who understand their own background or their own challenges or speak their own language or understand their own culture. We all do that all the time. And if you're here from another country and there's somebody else who, and you're finding it hard to fit into the University of Sydney and fit into Australia in its current thing, and you can spend time with people who share many things in common with you and many of the same challenges with you, good. However, we're all here, I think, to benefit from the diversity of being here. I love the fact I can talk to students, including students who are from Pakistan or from the Swat Valley or from Uzbekistan or from parts of Africa that I've never been, or from South America or other places. I think we need to put a higher value on the value of exposure to diversity. So sure, you might have your own preferred where I came from type group, but to be looking out to interact with in class, in entities, in departments, through common study, with those who are not like you. One of the great things about higher learning is exactly that opportunity. And we are a very international university. So I think one has to, at times, take the opportunity. And that can be difficult across language or across culture. But this is where things like sporting groups, social groups, other occasions can actually assist with that by joining in. That doesn't require so much cultural currency or doesn't require the degree of language competency or those other kind of attributes. In fact, our previous Vice-Chancellor, Michael Spence, made quite a deal of fuss about this. And I think quite a deal, as he spoke many languages and was learning Korean while he was here himself for his own family and other reasons. But that we often, as an institution, we had very narrow ways of socializing. We had very narrow ways of doing things that were not very welcoming. For example, to students who didn't drink alcohol, or students who didn't speak English in a particular way, So I think we as an institution have got to have that front of mind as well. How do we create opportunities for students from different cultural backgrounds, different language groups, different traditions to actually have social opportunities in particular ways and to benefit, that we would all benefit from the diversity of experiences that we bring to this place.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. I'm a PhD student and a little bit nervous about because I haven't started my research yet. Is that normal? I think because I feel like I don't have much knowledge yet.
Yes, yes, it's normal. We call it anticipatory anxiety. It's exactly how you should be. You should be concerned until you get started, until you get involved. And yeah, it's okay. You don't know much. We probably don't know much more. We know a bit more though. Often in the areas which are studied, that's entirely appropriate. And I think the thing about that is as quickly as possible to start to engage in the activity. If it's in a lab, to learn what to do in a lab. If it's in some other area, mathematical, to do some particular thing. To start doing the thing that you're actually going to be doing. So I think one of the issues is with supervisors and others is how quickly can we have students move into doing part of what they need to do. And often when you start to do, you realize actually the knowledge gaps, what needs to be done, but actually anxiety tends to go down while you're doing, as distinct from the phase of, oh my God, what is going to happen? Am I ever going to learn? Am I ever going to do anything? Am I ever going to be competent in particular issues? So it's very common to have that anticipatory anxiety, which goes down once you actually start to engage in the activity. So one of the dangers, of course, for students is to procrastinate, is to never get started, is to be too worried. So I've been discussing with supervisors and others, how do I get started? What can I start with? What's the first activity I can do that's meaningful? In fact, actually, sometimes to push supervisors to exactly that. What's something that I can be doing immediately, learning, reading, practicing, knowing how to learn a certain skill so that I have the experience of actually starting the journey?
We did have one more question. Maybe we can, it's just a very, very, very short one. It was, how do I balance uni work with part-time job and a social life? I think you've covered most of that, but you can just...
Well, just to speak on behalf of part-time work, actually, really interestingly, if you look at longer-term studies of students who do best, they're often working part-time. On top of everything else, they're working in particular ways. And it's kind of interesting. I think part of the benefit is this scheduling type stuff. If you have to work, you have to go and do this shift on Sunday, you have to go and do this thing on Thursday, whatever. It actually forces you into a kind of cycle of study, but at other particular times, as well as, keeping your head in the real world of other stuff that's going on out there. And to some degree, of course, relieving the concern about financial pressures or other things that you have to attend to. So it's a really interesting finding that often people who are in part-time work are the most successful.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions.
Pleasure. Back to you, Jamie, I think.
Back to Jamie.
Thank you all. And thank you so much, Professor Hickie, for coming along and joining us today, talking about postgraduate and HDR wellbeing. I think a couple of the takeaway messages for me was to be aware of your own mental health and use either internal resources, and strategies that you already have and that you already feel comfortable with. That could be reflection, it could be mindfulness, or engage with tools that are also available to you, those things that you're already using, or things like the Inner Well platform, which can help you to kind of increase your own awareness, but also monitor your well-being over time. The other big message I heard from today was to connect with others and to foster and strengthen those resources that you find that do improve your well-being or spark a bit of joy for you as well. I don't think you use those words, Ian, but that's great. And finally, from us, from me as well, I would say if you don't know where to get started, do visit that student life page or the SUPRA resources that we have available, and you can connect with the health and wellbeing team to ask any questions that you might have specific to you. And please look after yourselves and enjoy the rest of the year. We look forward to another successful one. Thank you again, Ian, for your time.